It's Marvel, baby!
The Marvel Cinematic Universe is a marvel unto itself, and really, its success can't be overstated. I mean, it can, but that's not the point. But what allowed the MCU to succeed while so many others failed in their attempt to trap the same lightning in a bottle? Many would point to the character work and how Marvel gave each character a standalone film to introduce them. And while that certainly helped, I wouldn't exactly say that it's what allowed the MCU to prosper the way it has. Hell, Civil War is proof that this wasn't the case, as it introduced two heavy hitters before they even got the chance to have their own standalones. So, if it isn't the characters or standalone films, what is it? Well, it technically still is the standalone films. I believe that the real key lies in the MCU's world building, specifically the world building of Phase 1. Now, that's not to say that the world building of Phase 2 and 3 is bad, it just feels very minimal, almost. You know, like someone felt like they didn't need to work as hard and that passing remarks and references to other films and characters was enough, and I'm getting off topic. Phase 1 is amazing and its world building is amazing. See, the MCU needed standalone films not for its characters, but for its world, which is a statement that seems pretty obvious, so what am I talking about? Well, I'm going to answer that with one simple statement. The order in which these films were released was absolutely one of the most important aspects regarding the success of Phase 1. Again, to many, this would seem obvious, but let me explain. Iron Man releases in 2008 and introduces a world very similar to ours. Sure, the technology looks like it's about maybe 5 to 10 years ahead, but for all intents and purposes, we have a story that's set in what's basically our own world. Something that a lot of imitators don't tend to understand is that for the first installment, this is actually enough. Sure, we get what is now considered the most famous end credits scene in the history of cinema, but in my opinion, I actually don't find this scene to be as nuanced, nor do I find it to even be good world building, which I will elaborate on later. First, we gotta talk about the Incredible Hulk. Whether you like it or not, the Incredible Hulk is the second installment of the MCU, and its importance to the grander MCU tends to be quite understated.
It's not an enemy that confronts us, it's a new power. Let loose through a crack in the cliff of nature's mystery. And how many times do you think that's happened in all of human history?
Like Iron Man, the world is still pretty grounded in our reality, but now the Incredible Hulk adds to it and takes it to the next step. Superpowers and superhumans are introduced and woven into the world that's already been established by Iron Man.
You're aware that we've got an infantry weapons development program. Well, in WW2, they initiated a sub-program for biotech force enhancement. Super soldier.
Yes.
Yeah, here is the first time Captain America is referenced in the MCU, in a scene talking plot and exposition. Yet, in this moment, superpowers are forever woven into this world's history, and it's done in a way that we accept it. I mean, there's a 9-foot-tall CGI monster already running around, so why would this be so hard to accept? And that's the point. Marvel eased us into this world. First came Iron Man, a world much like our own but with technology only a little bit more advanced. Then Incredible Hulk uses that technology to advance the humans that live in it. Then comes Iron Man 2, and now the tech of the world has taken a massive leap, but the world around us remains consistent and doesn't ask for more, most of the time. Iron Man 2 is when the MCU falls into the more common pitfalls of building a shared universe. The common pitfalls. There's this idea among creators that the way to expand and build a world is to flash a ton of Easter eggs and trinkets in front of the camera. In a way, Agent Coulson is a pitfall. On one hand, he's the glue and consistently the character to ground these films in the same reality. But on the other hand, that's kind of all he is. While he has a substantial role in the first Iron Man and sort of in Iron Man 2 and Thor, he's mainly there to be the most obvious and superficial indicator that these films take place in the same world. You know, because there's no other obvious indication of that fact. For many, this is almost the go-to when it comes to world building for a larger universe. This idea that placing these trivia items and the characters in front of the camera alludes to a bigger world that's out there and one that we can't see just yet. The Mummy does this, the Monsterverse does this, the DCU does this, Iron Man 2 and the rest of the MCU does this, and the bitter truth regarding this is, this isn't world building! This is sequel baiting! Nothing presented on screen is there to truly flesh out the world in which these characters inhabit. It's there to be a promise. A promise of some future adventure that we'll get to see as soon as this one is over. When the skull of a vampire is shown in The Mummy, it isn't there to expand on the world and allude to the idea that this monster hunting organization has dealt with vampires in the past. No, it's there to tell you that they are indeed planning on making another Dracula movie and that you should be excited for it, and also you should go see it. It becomes less about realizing the world and more about setting up a future that might not even happen. Which is why so many of these so-called Easter eggs or world-building scenes just feel empty and cynical. Because instead of serving the story or building the lore, they're instead there to sell you your next tickets. Iron Man 2 manages to stay afloat because it's already part of a bigger world and manages to actually make a contribution to it in spite of what executives mistake for world building or setup for future narratives. Nick Fury kind of just shows up. S.H.I.E.L.D. was already established in the first Iron Man in a very grounded and digestible manner, and this film doesn't do much to add to it and is basically just there to remind us that they exist. Also, Black Widow is hot. The important thing is that it advanced the world's tech further. Also Tesseract, giving further tiny details regarding the world's history, and the first hints regarding a more fantastical and mythical universe. Enter Thor! Thor does similar things as the Incredible Hulk, but instead of introducing superpowers, it instead introduces us to the outlandish, the fantastical, and the mythical. It wastes no time dropping us into the world of the gods, but wisely starts the movie in the established Marvel world from a perspective that we're used to. Ours. Then comes God shit! For about maybe 25 minutes. Then we cast out to Earth in a decision that almost everyone has umbrage with, but it helps blend these two wildly different realities together. Then S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up and then more God shit! Another! And these two worlds are finally blended together completely to form a single reality. Also, there's this remark.
I knew the scientist, the pioneer in gamma radiation. S.H.I.E.L.D. showed up and, he wasn't heard from again.
Hawkeye. I mean, look at all this outlandish shit that the movie just makes us accept. It's damn impressive. With the release and success of Thor, magic and gods have been integrated into the larger Marvel world in a way that the casual audience can accept and digest. In just 4 films, a world in which genius billionaires with high-tech mech suits, humans that can mutate into superhuman monsters, and gods can coexist has already been established. So now comes the film that finally brings it all together. Now a lot of you should already know what movie came out next and are probably confused by my previous statement. But this is where I say something that a number of you might not have thought of. A lot of people point to the first Avengers movie as the first time all these different elements were put into play at the same time. The technology, the superpowers, the fantastic mythology. But I'm gonna say that's not true. The first time they were actually put into play together was Captain America: The First Avenger. Captain America marks the first time the MCU successfully blended the tech of Iron Man, the powers of Hulk, and the celestial aspects of Thor into one film. But it doesn't stop there, because it's also a fucking period piece. An alternate past that finally separates the reality of the MCU completely from ours, imbuing it with a history in which all of these aspects and ideas work in tandem. The scene in which Red Skull uncovers the Tesseract is probably the best world-building scene in the entire MCU for how it just manages to combine the elements of the previous films and convey a world and history that feels lived in. And it's a scene where a superpowered Nazi mad scientist musing about Norse mythology uncovers one of 6 ingots forged from the birth of the known universe. And somehow, despite being the second scene in the movie, that sentence raises 0 eyebrows. That is an achievement. But something like that also demonstrates that if this was the first time the world was actually introduced to the MCU, if this was the first movie the public had ever seen, it probably wouldn't have been as successful. And that's no slight on the quality of Captain America. It's a good movie, but it's one with a world that's so outlandish and not in the way most superhero movies were at the time. But because of this release order and Marvel gradually easing us into a world they've been building piece by piece, when the first Avengers movie finally happens, the only new thing that's actually added to this world are fucking aliens, because the hardest part of the world building has already been done. We've already seen this tech. We've already seen these powers, we've already seen these legends, and we've already seen these kinds of costumes. So when the first portal in the sky opens up, we aren't blindsided, nor are we choking on a single massive serving of lore. A lot of people are right about the DCEU being rushed, but not in the way they think, because when they talk about giving a standalone movie, they are usually referring to the characters rather than the world. Man of Steel isn't a bad start to a universe. Shut up, I like it. But then comes along BVS, and in one scene it goes metahumans, alien technology, Atlantis, all of that on top of the fact that we're being introduced to the new Batman in this film. The reason each Justice League member needed their own film wasn't because their characters needed it. Any film can introduce a number of characters into a larger narrative. They needed their standalones because each member represents a different pillar of the grander DC universe and make up the essential parts of the world. But back to Marvel! Marvel created a magnificent world, but it did so meticulously and patiently. And it certainly helped if the films were enjoyable. But I feel that a video called "The Key to Marvel's Success Was Enjoyable Films" would be about the dumbest video I could possibly make, on top of the fact that some people have probably already made it. But Marvel knew that they would lose their audience if said audience ever felt overwhelmed by the world, or felt like they were being baited to see sequels and spin-offs. The construction of a world, a universe that can sustain countless stories and characters, isn't done in a single film. It isn't done by putting it all at the forefront. It's done by knowing when to introduce a new aspect. It's done with patience. It's done with the story and audience in mind. That's how Marvel created a universe.